Hello all you train survivalists, as always I am Cosmic and today we're going to be reviewing The Final Station, developed by Do My Best and published by Tinybuild Games. At its core, The Final Station is an indie action-adventure survival game that is played out on a 2D side-scrolling landscape and with pixel art. The game itself is set in a dystopian future, 100 years after an event known as the First Visitation that nearly wiped out mankind. It's happening all over again. Mysterious visitors and a mysterious disease has taken over the planet. The story places you in the role of a train driver and you have access to one of the last remaining trains on the planet. Now, your job at the beginning of the game is to essentially survive, and you are then given orders by military to start transporting things around and trying to help the cause. I don't want to delve too much into the story itself because the story for me is where this game is at. It is a narratively driven experience, but it leaves things to the imagination. There's lots to explore, there's lots of lore in the game to pick up, and what I really like about it, there's subplots going on all the time. So each level that you get into, there are various subplots going on that give a bigger picture to the overall story of the game. Mechanics wise, the game was a little bit of a surprise for me in the sense that on first appearance I thought it was going to be a roguelike. I thought that it was going to have permadeath, that it was going to be very survivally, that it was going to really test your skills in that way. However, the game does not play like that whatsoever. Essentially, the game is divided into two parts. You have a train section and then you have on the foot section. Now, the train section itself is where you travel between destinations, essentially where you travel between levels. Now, essentially all you do on the train is maintain the train. So each journey you will have one part of the train that will be malfunctioning, and then you need to maintain that till the next destination. On top of that, you also will pick up survivors in levels and they will travel with you, and they need often med kits or food to survive. And the great thing about the survivors, however, is that they banter and talk between themselves, which again is very similar to the notes that you will pick up throughout the level system, and you'll be able to kind of get a glimpse into what the story is going on about and what is happening in the world overall. Once the train section's over and you've landed into a level, this is where the core of the game is ultimately. It is essentially a 2D shooter in some respects. I was expecting it to be a lot more difficult than it was. I was expecting it to be a lot more survival horror almost, and it isn't that at all. There's certainly hints at that type of genre, but it isn't really what the core of the game is about. Essentially, enemies aren't a massive threat for the most part. Instead, they're treated more like puzzles. Each enemy type has a various weakness in terms of how you take it down. So, for example, some enemies can just be meleeed, some have to be shot in the head. There's an armored enemy that you have to punch first to take off their armored helmet, and then shoot in the head to take them down. There's an explosive enemy that you have to shoot from far range, because if it gets too close it's going to blow everything up and kill you. And those enemies start to group up as the game progresses. And now as the difficulty curves up as the game progresses, you're going to find groups of enemies that you have to deal with in a variety of different ways. Now these enemies are going to be the same enemies that you faced for the last 3 levels, but they're going to be placed very differently. So for example, you could have an armored zombie at the front, a couple of zombies behind, and then an explosive zombie, which means that you're going to have to get rid of that armored zombie very, very quickly in order to take out the other ones before they get to you. While you're patrolling levels, you'll be able to scavenge for resources that when you get back onto your train, you'll be able to craft certain items like medkits or ammo. The game itself isn't particularly sparse with ammo. I have to say that for the most part, if you don't go in gun crazy and shooting everything and missing all your shots. As long as your shots are on point, you tend to have enough ammo for the course. One of the game's greatest assets is its level design. Each level is handcrafted and you can really tell, and it really works. It's a pleasure to go through each level. They don't feel too long or too short, they're just right. Each level has something to explore, hidden passages, and ultimately there's a lot to be said about this game's level design. I think it's really, really good. The downside to that is, however, that it gets held up on the fact that the game doesn't really, go for survival horror and instead goes for more of a shoot 'em up, which is a little bit sad. This, coupled with the fact that the checkpoint system is so liberal, means death is not meaningful whatsoever in the game. I have to say that I think for this game in particular, especially with the atmosphere that it's trying to invoke, and it does a pretty good job of that, by the way, especially with the story and the aesthetic. I think what would have been great with this is some roguelike elements. Make death meaningful. Make it so that you maybe have to play again, or that you go back a couple of weapons, or you have to lose resources or lose survivors, or something that affects you for the future instead of checkpoint, I only went back 3 seconds. It's not meaningful, and that ultimately detracts from the game, and I think it plays at odds with what the game itself is trying to invoke in terms of its atmosphere and its playstyle. It's trying to make you feel this survival horror atmosphere, all the while having core mechanics that directly contradict that. Now, with that all being said, I do have a couple more bugbears with the game. They're only minor, such as the amount of time it takes to get off a ladder, which usually ends up meaning that you get killed for a ridiculous reason. Other than small minor bugbears, I have to say that the final station really did impress me. It was a really fun game. It's about 4 or 5 hours long, maybe 6 hours if you take it slow, and ultimately, I never got bored once doing it. The train sections do get a little bit monotonous and they are a little bit contrived, but they do provide a nice breakup in between levels. And sometimes it can get a little bit hectic, not having enough medkits and having 3 survivors who are bleeding out, and you've still got a long journey to go. It can get a little bit tense. Ultimately, however, I think Do My Best have done a really good job with this. I think they've created a really interesting world. They've created really interesting lore. Then the level design is top notch, and I was really impressed with that. I think that this game would have just benefited if the developers had just been a little bit meaner, be willing to punish the player for making mistakes, be willing to put some mechanics in there that people are going to get frustrated by. And because ultimately this is what this type of game needs. It needs something that's going to make failure meaningful. That being said, though, I have to say that it's a game that is well worth playing. It's an indie game that I think, despite its flaws, is well worth adding to your collection, even if you don't particularly enjoy side-scrolling 2D shooters. I think that you'll get a bundle of joy if you like games that have a strong aesthetic, a strong atmosphere, and a strong narrative design. Then this is well worth playing. So that is my review of The Final Station. Thank you so much for watching and listening. As always, do like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and I will see you next time.